Not too close. I look better from a distance. Okay, so last Sunday I was at Against the Stream, and I gave a talk on the different kinds of Buddhism. And as I was researching my talk, I found an article that said all forms of Buddhism have things in common. There's something that crosses the line each time. And so I'm going to talk about that today. What do all forms of Buddhism have in common? And we have early Buddhism, and then we have a later Buddhism, which is called Mahayana. And within the Mahayana, there is Vajrayana, the Tibetan Buddhism. So you've got the three main schools of Buddhism. And sometimes when I talk about early Buddhism and later Buddhism, or first Buddhism and second Buddhism, I'm doing that to make a distinction, because we have an orthodox approach, and then we have a reform approach, much like the Catholics and the Protestants. And in the Catholics and Protestants' case, they're both speaking about the same God. And in the case of Buddhism, they're all speaking about the same Buddha, except for one exception. And we can go into that later. So as I was reading, I said, well, to myself, what do they have in common? And the first thing is, they have in common that there is a way to become a Buddhist. Now, just because you're practicing Buddhism doesn't make you a Buddhist, because there are Christians practicing Buddhism, and there are Muslims practicing Buddhism, and Jews, and Hindus, and atheists. And they're practicing Buddhism, and they might refer to themselves as a Buddhist, but a Buddhist wouldn't think of them as being a Buddhist unless they went through the ceremony. So there's a ceremony that requires you to take 3 refuges and 5 precepts. And it needs to be offered by a monastic, by a monk. It doesn't work if it's a lay person. And that monk is the direct link to the Buddha. And so once you've gone through the process of becoming an official Buddhist, you get a certificate that says you are an official Buddhist now. And it's suitable for framing, and you can put it on your wall. So we have this ceremony to become a Buddhist, and then we have a bunch of people practicing Buddhism, and then the thing that all schools and forms of Buddhism have in common, number 1, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Number 2, a triad which encompasses Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. So all forms of Buddhism have refuge in the Buddha, refuge in the Dharma, refuge in the Sangha, and Sila, Samadhi, Panya, personal discipline, mental purification, and wisdom. So I'm going to talk about all of that today in 28 minutes. So who was the Buddha? Well, the Buddha was a human being, which is what really inspired me, because I fell into that category as well. So that means I have the ability to realize everything the Buddha realized because I have a human birth. The reason we call him the Buddha is because at the time he was born, Buddhism had fallen away from the earth. Not one Buddhist was living, and not one Buddha was living. So there was a void. And all of a sudden, Siddhartha was born on earth in Nepal, and he was, in a few years, 35, to become the new Buddha. Now, according to Sri Lankan Buddhism, early tradition, there were 27 Buddhas before him. He is the 28th Buddha. Early Buddhism also has a bodhisattva. You might not be aware of that, but the bodhisattva in early Buddhism is Maitreya Buddha, who is now in Tusita heaven and will be reborn on earth once the last person that knows the teachings of Siddhartha dies. and then there'll be a void on the earth, no Buddhism, and Maitreya will be born and ultimately become the 29th Buddha. So we call him the Buddha because he didn't have a teacher. It was through his own effort and insight and persistence that he became a perfect human being. And perfect in the sense of never having greed but only generosity, never having anger and hatred, only love and kindness, never suffering from delusion and ignorance, only having insight and wisdom into the true nature of what it meant to be a human being. It requires a little faith in the beginning to even think that there may have been somebody like that. You know, we can read the books and there's some wonderful stories, but there's always that, well, it almost sounds too good to be true. And yet there's historical evidence that someone lived at the same time the historical Buddha lived, and their similarities are almost too many to name. And so perhaps there is historical evidence that a person who exemplifies Buddhism lived 2,600 years ago. And then you read the suttas, and it confirms your initial hope and dream that, yes, there was somebody. So we take refuge in the idea. We can't take refuge in the Buddha because he's dead. But we can take refuge in the idea that he lived and walked the earth and left behind his teachings for us. And it is said that the Buddha remarked, "Don't follow me, follow my teachings." Because he was temporary, as we all are. And his teachings now have lasted almost 2,600 years, which is a remarkable event to say the least. And as a side note to that, one of the reasons the teachings of the Buddha still exist today is because of religion. Now, a lot of people don't look at Buddhism as religion, they look at Buddhism as a lifestyle or a philosophy or a therapy. But when I asked Dr. Ratanasara about the religious aspects of Buddhism and saying to him that I wasn't quite sure they were as important as the philosophy, he said to me, they are more important than the philosophy because the religious aspects of Buddhism has allowed the philosophy to exist for 2,600 years. Without religion, it would have died long, long ago because only the philosophers would be discussing it and talking about it and probably not practicing it. So we come to the Dharma, the most important part of Buddhism today in 2017, the teachings of the Buddha. And we have them in a series of books, maybe 100 all total, and even in a Kindle version that can be downloaded on your little portable screen. It's just amazing how easy it is now to read and understand Buddhism. So why is it so important that it still exists? Because it is the roadmap to our salvation. Now, some people don't consider Buddhism a religion because it's not God-based, but if you look at all the definitions of religion, it always comes to a place where a religion happens where there is salvation. And there is salvation in Buddhism, and we can be saved. But what we're being saved from is not sin, we're being saved from our misery, our suffering, our unsatisfactoriness. That at the point of nirvana, that falls away. And we are no longer dissatisfied. We have come into the place of peace and happiness. So the Dharma is our guide. The Dharma will tell us what we need to do, but it won't do it for us. And this is a problem because we could say we have faith in Buddhism and maybe that's all I need. Well, in most forms of Buddhism, you need more than faith. And then you could say, well, I have devotion towards the Buddha. I offer incense every day. Maybe that's all I need for my salvation. And in some forms of Buddhism, that may be correct, but in most forms, no. What you need is good karma. And good karma is skillful thinking, skillful speech, and skillful action. That is your ticket. And understanding how the Dharma works allows us to change our karma and make it skillful. Now, the word Dharma has 16 different meanings in some dictionaries, but the two meanings I like the best are the teachings of the Buddha and ultimate truth. And to someone who's a Buddhist, those two ring true. They go together like tea and cookies. So we have ultimate truth, we have the teachings of the Buddha, and they can be understood as the ultimate truth. Now we have the Sangha. The Sangha are the monks and nuns, the novice monks, the novice nuns, the fully ordained monks, the fully ordained nuns. Lay people are not included in the Sangha in a traditional way. The lay people who are included in Buddhism are upasakas and upasikas. Those are lay people who have taken the 3 refuges and the 5 precepts. But in most forms of Buddhism, they are not considered Sangha. In America, we have a tradition of inclusion, and so oftentimes you'll hear we're all members of the Sangha. And at some level, that's true. But to be ultimately correct, you need to only include monks and nuns, novice and full. Okay. Why do we need those as our refuge? Because they are an example of living Buddhism. You see, the Buddhism you find in the books died a long, long time ago. And when you look at the pages, there are lines. And we interpret those lines and we have pictures in our mind, but they don't give us a true and realistic interpretation of how to live as a Buddhist. And when we see the monks and nuns, they are doing their best to live according to the teachings of the Buddha. And they have taken many, many vows as reference points so they don't get lost along the way. Now, the funny part for me is when everybody who's a layperson wants to know what the vows of the monk or nun is so they can keep track and see how well they're doing. And they can check everything off. So in the old days, you couldn't find out. Nobody would tell you, you know. And nowadays, you can go on, Amazon.com and buy a book of the vows of the monks and nuns, which is really boring to read. It's not exciting at all. But let me say it can be broken down simply to 4 things. Not to kill, not to steal, no sexual misconduct, and not to lie about your spiritual attainments. So you can lie about how much you weigh, but you can't lie about your spiritual attainments. So we have those 4 things. Those root vows are also found in the 5 precepts. But in the 5 precepts, they added one more thing, of course, and that is not to consume intoxicants. Okay, so that's where you start as a monk, that's where you start as a layperson, that's where you start as a Buddhist. Somebody used a metaphor of moving from California to Arizona and not getting an Arizona license, driver's license. That lacks commitment. So somebody who practices Buddhism and doesn't become a Buddhist has missed an opportunity to have their license. And with that commitment that goes along with being a Buddhist, you interpret the teachings in a much different way. It's becoming you. So, the triad, Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Why is that important? Why is it found in all forms of Buddhism? Because it really becomes the building blocks of our nirvana, of our enlightenment. And it starts simply enough. It starts with our precepts, our morality, the way we live our life. And the 5 precepts I'll remind you again, are not to take life, not to take what is not given, not to indulge in sexual misconduct, not to speak unskillfully, not to consume intoxicants. So these are training precepts. This is the foundation of our meditation practice. You're not going to have a good meditation practice without the precepts as your foundation. Now, in order to fully implement the precepts, you need to be mindful. So this mindfulness really is important because it allows you to see what you're thinking, what you're saying, and what you're doing. And the 5 precepts deal with what you say and what you do. So that's where you start. The things that manifest in front of you, your speech. Just the other day I was at Vaughn's supermarket. And I had finished purchasing my cookies and my bread, and I was bagging them, and the clerk asked if he could use my Vaughn's card to give the man behind me a discount on his purchase. And I looked at his purchase, and it was a quart of vodka. And I said no. And all of a sudden, why won't you give him a discount? Well, I don't want that on my Vaughn's itemized list of what I bought this week, because then I'll get coupons for discounts on whiskey and brandy. And I don't drink. So I said to him, why don't you ask the woman behind him? You know, because I'm not going to do it. And then he just shut up and said to the man, next time bring your Vaughn's card. So I could have gone into a tirade of why and if and should and blah, 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 but I didn't want to go there. I just wanted to simply say no. But sometimes it's just too quick an answer to be left alone. And there needed to be an explanation, because we always want to know why. So we're going, and we have now made our decision to follow the 5 precepts, and the 5th one is not to consume intoxicants, and I don't want to be associated with consuming intoxicants, even if I don't. And no seemed like the appropriate answer, and I probably wouldn't have said that if I hadn't taken the 5 precepts. I probably would have said, sure, get 2 bottles, I'll give you a double discount. But I felt it inappropriate. And I would feel the same way if somebody wanted me to give them a discount on cigarettes in the Vaughn's line, because I stopped smoking and I didn't want to encourage him to smoke by giving him a discount, and then he would die sooner than he has to, and blah, blah, blah. So as we define ourselves through our precepts, we start seeing the world in a little different way. We start noticing things that we were blind to before, because we've chosen the 5 precepts as our reference points in life. This is how I'm going to control and discipline my speech and action. Samadhi. Samadhi is right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. It is the meditation aspects of the Noble Eightfold Path. So Sila, Samadhi, Panya. Sila, the personal discipline. Samadhi, the mental purification. Right effort, to abandon unskillful thoughts that have arisen, to prevent unskillful thoughts from arising, to develop skillful thoughts that have not yet arisen, to maintain skillful thoughts that are already there. Those are the 4 aspects of right effort found in the Eightfold Path, and they all have to do with your intention. Is your intention based on greed, hatred, and delusion? If that's the case, you want to abandon those as soon as possible and prevent any new ones from arising. If by some chance of good karma or fate, your mind is filled with generosity, compassion, and wisdom, you want to maintain those as long as you can and develop new ones to take the place of the ones that fall away. None of our thoughts or intentions are going to last forever. It's always a momentary experience. They arise, they exist, and they pass away. And as an example, you might be on the freeway, it's the 405, it's rush hour, And then you let somebody in front of you because they signal they want to go in front of you. And you're practicing generosity, and then you do that. Okay, and then somebody else wants to get in, and you let them in. And then somebody else wants to get in, and then you don't let them in. So that thought of generosity now has gone away. Now it's self-preservation and your place in line, you know. So we can see how our mind is always in a constant state of flux and change. The two main forms of Buddhist meditation are samatha and vipassana, tranquility and insight. And it's said that the Buddha learned tranquility meditation from the yogis of India. And he was one of their best students and always surpassed his teacher. And his teacher would offer him their followers. And the Buddha would always say, no, 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 this isn't it yet. It's close, but this isn't it yet. Then the Buddha, through his own effort and insight, rediscovered vipassana meditation, which had been lost to the world. Because the last Buddha had died and the last person that knew his teachings had died, and with that went vipassana meditation. So he rediscovered vipassana meditation, which allowed him to achieve his nirvana. But he did samatha before his vipassana, and if you go on certain retreats, what they'll do is they'll offer you a samatha meditation to exercise your concentration and focus, and then switch you over to vipassana for the insight to be found. So if you only want to do vipassana, you will achieve nirvana the fastest, but you won't be doing it the way the Buddha did it. And if you only want to do samatha meditation, you won't achieve nirvana in most cases, but you'll achieve peace and tranquility, just not liberation from suffering. So we have these two options, and I would encourage you to do both, to practice both samatha and vipassana, because the insight you receive may make you agitated, and the samatha will bliss you out, and you'll be able then to integrate all those insights without going crazy. Now we come to the wisdom aspect, which is really sort of an interesting idea, panya, P-A-N-N-A. So what is wisdom in Buddhism? And I know if you're a secular humanist, you might say, well, wisdom comes from philosophy or from the books or from a good teacher, but that's not necessarily the case in Buddhism. So wisdom works like this in Buddhism. Imagine reading a book and you understand what's being said. That's the first stage of wisdom. You understand intellectually what you've just heard or read. The second stage of wisdom comes when you reflect and ruminate on what you've just read. And now you're making it yours. And now you're going into a deeper place of understanding, but still not the wisdom the Buddha was talking about. The third level of wisdom is when you experience what you've read in your own personal life at an intuitive, nonverbal level. So you experience what you've read in the book at an intuitive, nonverbal level. Now instead of having a deeper understanding, now you have a greater knowing. And I link knowing with intuition and understanding with the intellect. And Buddhist wisdom comes from knowing. And the knowing happens in the meditation practice, where you experience certain things at many different levels, oftentimes not at a verbal level, or couldn't even be translated into words. It's simply a feeling that comes. And you know it's true. And you may be able to explain why you know it's true, but you may not be able to explain, but it's still true. So the wisdom the Buddha was talking about is something that we have to work on through our meditation practice and come to know through the intuition rather than the intellect. And as Westerners and Americans, everybody that's in this room today has got a much stronger intellect, more likely, than an intuition. We've let the intellect take over. It's become the strong man. And the intuition is just this little thing that occasionally arises, and we're not quite sure what the feeling means, and it goes away, and we discount it as being, an aberration, or you're not feeling well. And ultimately, that's the place where you see and hear without sound or sight. That's the place. That's the place. Cool. So every form of Buddhism has Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And some forms of Buddhism emphasize one over the other, or emphasize all three in combination. But they're all found in Buddhism, and if you become an official Buddhist, and in May, at this center, during the Buddha's birthday, we offer the 5 precepts and the 3 refuges. You can become an official Buddhist right here, because we have monks that will give you your refuge and your precepts. So if you're practicing Buddhism now and are thinking about, maybe I want to make that commitment, maybe the marriage would work. Okay. You can do the ceremony here. So, it's something that's found in all, and that means that it must be more true than other things that are found in only some. And, when I look at Zen, there's a focus on meditation, but not so much on sutras. And when I look at Sri Lankan Buddhism, there's a focus on sutras and not so much on meditation. And then you get into this and that and blah, blah, blah. But it all works. It's just different paths, a different emphasis. And it all works because it's up to you. And that's why it works. Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to share right now about what's been said, or maybe what wasn't said? Yes?
Define the term samadhi again.
Okay, samadhi, samatha. It's a form of meditation that uses concentration. You focus on one object only, and you let all the other objects fall away. So it's one-pointedness. It's a laser-like focus on the object of meditation. Past and future fall away, good and bad fall away, us and them fall away. The duality of your reality falls away. I think there's a song there.
Can the concentration be on the breath right there?
That's what's most encouraged. Breath meditation is found both in samatha meditation and vipassana meditation. I started with that. I'm still using it after 30 years. It still works. Yeah.
I have a question.
Do you visualize during vipassana?
I don't know if it's as much about visualization as more about understanding, and using concepts to see the true nature of your reality. And what they're talking about in that case is the true nature would be anicca, dukkha, anatta. The true nature is all things are impermanent and ever-changing, but you have to have those concepts of impermanence and ever-changing. All things are ultimately unsatisfactory, but that requires concepts as well. And then all things lack an essence, a self, an identifiable being or thing that separates them from everything else. So the third one is all things are interconnected and interdependent. That also requires an intellectual foundation and words and ideas and thoughts and visions, if you will. In samatha meditation, the idea is to get rid of all that stuff, all that intellectual words and ideas and thoughts and past and future, and just come to the present moment experience of your life through the sensation of breath. That sensation of breath only happens right now. Didn't happen yesterday, it's not going to happen tomorrow. You'll have a different sensation, but it won't be the same one. So when you come to your sensation of breath and you're highly focused on that, you're coming to the present moment experience of your life. And that's where it starts to happen then.
And the other is there's an intellectual concept that you're focusing on.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of, in insight meditation, there are a lot of ideas and concepts that can be used for your liberation, like not self, suffering, and everything's changing. Those allow you to relax your grip on your reality, to loosen it, to be able to let go and hold on in a more appropriate way. Does that help? Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, automatically, by the fact that we have a human birth, whether we're aware of it or not, we are in a position to become enlightened.
Okay.
Do you know, or does one know, if they're, whether, let's assume they're a cleric, does one know what stage of development they're at, or what stage, for example, if they're a stream enterer or if they're a non-returner, does one automatically know it? Because you had mentioned that the one thing you can't lie about, you're supposed to be telling the truth anyway once you take precepts, but
Your spiritual attainments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I would say no, you don't know. And I would say if you think you know, you're wrong. So it's one of those things that somebody else might be able to tell you. Sometimes when I look in the mirror, I'm really good looking. And other times, forget it. And so how do you know for sure? What the heck it is. Other people may have an idea. They often say that your teachers will be able to judge better than you can, but I don't think they would tell you, because it would short-circuit everything. The idea is not something to attain, it's something you already are. So you're not searching for it, you're trying to realize it.
manifest. Right?
So, yeah. Hi.
Thanks for your talk. I need some clarification of what does it mean, like, on a practical day-to-day basis, to take refuge in the Sangha, when the Sangha are just the monks and nuns and novices. So if I were to take refuge, the monks, I know who they are, they're up here, how would that translate to helping me in my practical day-to-day meditation, or trying to live up, to practice the precepts, become a better person, all that stuff. Like, how would I use that, or how do I take refuge practically in that?
Yeah, I'll say what I think, and then I'll let the monks say what they think. I think the idea is that you don't have to imagine, you don't have to visualize. They're real, and they exist today. If all the monks and nuns were dead and gone centuries ago, we'd have to imagine what it might be like, and we'd always probably give them more credit than due. And we'd say, they were so wonderful, they could fly, they could walk on the water, I wish they were here. And yet, you come in and you see monks, and they're sort of just like you, except they've chosen a lifestyle, and they follow vows because of their ordination. So seeing a man or a nun allows you to be able to relate to it at a human level, at a personal level. That's what I think. It's taking refuge in real people who are practicing real Buddhism. And Reverend Shanti, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I think you're right. Basically, you can imagine, the different that the lay people and the monks, and you can take some kind of thinking about the other things, about the Buddha said there are so many monks and nuns in this world, and which is they are mostly we learning about they are more higher than us, because they most the time they are enlightenment or going to some step close to the and we have to have the quality about that monks. Then we can think and you can think yes, we are going to be one day in that step. That's the I was thinking.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, when we go for the refuge, the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha has 9 qualities. So that means when we go for the refuge to the Sangha, that means you are contemplating that 9 qualities. You are recalling their qualities, and according to Buddhism, you mean that you have a bliss, but if we can follow those great qualities to our day-to-day life, that means it's a refuge for you, I go for when I want to go for the refuge to the Sangha and Dhamma. Dhamma has 6 qualities, and the Buddha has 9 qualities. So that means we are contemplating that great qualities. So if we can practice those qualities in our day-to-day life, that means you are a Buddhist. So you have.
Can you give us a couple qualities, the Sangha qualities? Can you name one or two?
Actually, Supatipanno. Supatipanno means the Sangha, always they are straight, they are always concerned about precepts.
Ah,
Okay?
yeah.
So, Ujupatipanno, when they want to take a decision, definitely they think this is wholesome or this is unwholesome. Okay?
Yeah.
And Nyayapatipanno, and also definitely when they want to take a decision, they think this is belongs to Vinaya, discipline. So like that they
Role models.
yeah, they are contemplating the nature of the qualities
Wonderful.
and how they can connect to this life. Like
Very
that.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Good.
I'd like to
Thank.
just add one more thing. The other thing is that monks and nuns are, one of the requirements is to teach. So where you can read the sutras or you can read about Vipassana or the different types of meditation, this is a source, like a living source of someone who's experiencing that, and as part of their devotion, their commitment is to be practicing it. So you actually have a place, a refuge to go to speak to someone and learn from them, because it's a requirement to teach. Whereas with a layperson, it's not a precept that you take.
Yeah, and just to coattail on that, when you speak to your teachers or your monks, and what they're telling you is what they do. They're not telling you what you should do. And so now you have to interpret it and then apply it to your life. So as Bhante Punaratana said, the qualities, okay, and that's what he uses as his reference point, and then you can use those same qualities as well. You know, but it always comes back to you. It's always your fault. Hideki.
You mentioned something that you were going to talk about later, and I forgot what it was.
Oh, the things they don't.
Oh, yes, the one exception.
Right.
The one exception. I talked about the one exception, about faith and devotion.
Right.
And I'm glad you brought that up. So we have in Buddhism something called Pure Land, Amitabha Buddha. And these banners actually refer to Amitabha Buddha. It's very much part of the Vietnamese tradition as well. Now, the thing about Pure Land, which I find just fascinating, is this. It's a simple practice. Anybody literate or illiterate can do it, and they can do it right. All you need to do is have faith, vow, and devotion in Amitabha, and you will be transported to his Pure Land, which is a heaven realm, where everything speaks the Dharma, and you're guaranteed to achieve nirvana there. There are no fails there. So when I first came to Pure Land Buddhism, I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is really simple, and I can see why it would be useful for people who were illiterate. But then I made the mistake of looking in the back door at the philosophy behind this very simple practice. And the philosophy is profound and deep, to say the least. That it supports this simple practice because there were many books written about why humans have lost the capacity to achieve nirvana. And this is the only way. And they go into this philosophical discussion of why that's the case. So it just blows me away that a practice so simple can be so profound philosophically and so useful, because not everybody is going to understand the Dharma. It takes a long time to understand the Dharma in a correct way. Not everyone has time or inclination to go on retreats or practice meditation every day. But they can simply say, I have faith, vow, and devotion in Amitabha Buddha. And if it's said 3 times with those characteristics, guaranteed trip to heaven.
Well, I'm Japanese American, and in Seattle I went to the Seattle Buddhist Church,
Mhm.
named the Seattle Buddhist Temple. And what I didn't understand, and I was 12 or 13 years old when we moved up there, and to go, and it's exactly what they did.
Yeah, yeah.
And they never explained the Juni Rai, for example. It's a chant,
Yeah,
but nobody, none of us kids knew understood what it meant.
yeah.
It wasn't until I came down here and Jeannie brought some pamphlets from her Sri Lankan dermatologist that I read that said, yeah, well, I understand this. And so that's what, piqued my interest, and we went to the Dhamma college, and
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kind of on my way to becoming a Buddhist.
Yeah. They were trying to keep it simple for you. The
Well-
Christians do the same thing.
But in keeping it too simple, you don't. I didn't feel that I learned. very
Yeah.
much.
But you didn't really need to learn anything. You just needed to do it with faith, vow, and devotion. The problem is, when you're a Western European and American living in our culture, you always want to know why. That Malaysian airliner that went down, it still hasn't been found 3 years later. Driving people crazy. They spent millions of dollars. Where did it go? How could it disappear? This is 2017. Why don't we know? So we all want to know. And thankfully, if you really do want to know, there are places you can find out. And when I came to Buddhism, it was just watch your breath and meditate. But I wanted to know why, just like you. And so years later, I figured it out. But it was literally years later. And I needed time for the practice to help me understand it. And I think if I practice Pure Land Buddhism, that practice will help me understand it at a much deeper level. And then reading the philosophy, and I just posted a PDF of 3 books from Pure Land on my Facebook page, important texts about the Pure Land tradition. And so it's always be careful if the teacher doesn't want to share everything with you. He might not be sharing the stuff that would be important. Or he might say to you, as the Buddha did, when he was asked, why don't you share with us all that you know? He says, what I share with you will end your suffering. The other stuff won't. I only teach 2 things, why we suffer, how to end suffering. So it's interesting, the interesting dilemma. But thankfully, we have Amazon.com and all those books.
I'd like to, one last thing about Pure Land. Reverend Karuna, we had a long discussion about it over many years, and finally I kept questioning what the Pure Land was and where it was, and she said, you're not getting it, it's here. This is the Pure Land. Every single thing that happens, every step you take is part of your awakening. In other words, enlightenment, it's like you were saying, there's no fail, and that everything that happens, everything you see in the Pure Land enables you to become awake. And she said, we are in the Pure Land already. We just don't realize it.
I'm not, unfortunately. I'm still in samsara. And I can't find parking. So, yes, did you have a question? Why
do you think that suffering brings us closer to the possibility of enlightenment?
Well, number one, it starts with why we suffer. That's what the Buddha started with. First noble truth, we're suffering. He has to show you exactly why you're suffering, and you have to be able to define it for yourself. What is my suffering? And then the second part is, let me tell you how to end it. So the Buddha went further and said, okay, now that you know you're suffering, let me show you how to end your suffering. And you can go to any other religion, and they're not going to go there. They're going to go for heaven and God and a lot of other stuff, but never about suffering. So we have our own little niche, and we're comfortable in that, and our message works. But you got to know your suffering before you come to Buddhism. So, thank you. Hi, Jeannie. We got it.
Oh, no.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Last question.
Last question.
The intuition part is really hard for me to get. I mean, because, people tell me, oh, you're so intuitive. But if I was so intuitive, then it seems like you'd be able to make decisions really quick.
No. And intuition doesn't allow you to make decisions. Intellect allows you to make decisions because it's dualistic. You have a good decision and a bad decision. Intuition just has one thing. It's hard to make a choice if you only have one thing. So, and yes, or you could always be right, or it could always be wrong, or it could be neither one or the other. So you have intuition. Your poetry is wonderful, your pictures are wonderful, you're using a different part of yourself when you do that. But to try to define it, you're always going to miss the point, because it's not dualistic. It's a feeling, it's a sensation. And
looks like Warren Buffett.
okay, please.
Warren Buffett knows he's made a wrong decision because he gets a back pain. Gamblers, they did a study. Their body intuits that they're about to go into a losing streak. Their intellect ignores it for the most part, and they go into the losing streak. So basically, the intuition is all the stuff we're ignoring for the most part, but gives us a better insight into what is. So Warren Buffett is, what, $80 billion?
Yes, what is?
Okay, thank you. I just want to make